everybody. Thank you very much for being here with us today. Thank you to Rashid and colleagues at Positive Youth Foundation. Thank you to the team at Positive Youth Foundation, and thank you to the young people who give us all a reason for being here together today. We're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about education and education for young people and the young people that we're here to talk about today, and how we can make sure that it's an inclusive, accessible and engaging experience for all young people. There's some key things that we've heard already this morning that I think we really need to take account of when we have these conversations. Something that Rashid said which really, really resonates, which was about young people being able to find the fun and find the fun in the moment. Education should be fun. It should be something that's engaging and exciting and gives young people the chance to unlock their own potential and their own future. And we know that all of the young people that we're fortunate enough to work with have absolute power and potential. And it's our job to connect to enable them to unlock that. We have a responsibility to do that. And we're really fortunate today that we've got a panel of absolute experts of both lived and professional experience that we can hear from, so that we can start to get a bit of an insight into what we need to do as practitioners and policymakers to make sure that all young people, whatever their background, whatever their experiences, have access to fair, accessible, enjoyable education so that they can find their power. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow each of the panel members to give a quick introduction. Then we've got a couple of talking points, and then we'll open the room to questions after that. So take the opportunity to listen to who they are and what their experiences are, so that you know who to direct your questions to when we open it up for discussion. Please, can I start at the end? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Ashwini Kisnaredi. I am a research fellow at the University of Oxford. I am in the Refugee Studies Centre, and I work predominantly on refugee children who are in camps, well, refugee and asylum-seeking children who are in camps, but also who have been resettled in the UK. I also have a background in teaching. I was a secondary school teacher before I went back and did my PhD in Portugal.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Beth Moore. I'm Deputy Principal at London South East Education Group. And one of the things I found is that I've worked across multiple boroughs now, I've worked across different local authorities, and we're seeing more and more young people coming into FE in that post-16 space in the last 5 years who are unaccompanied. And across different local authorities and boroughs, we're hearing the same sort of themes, the same conversations that are taking place. So I think it's really important we talk about those, because I think it can feel quite isolating in education. It can feel like these issues we're facing within our sort of setting in a school or a provider, and actually a lot of these things go across. I also started as a youth worker. That's my background, so I'm very passionate about youth work before moving into education. And I think it's really important that we match that work we're doing in education settings into the community and strengthen those ties together. And sometimes that can be a gap between the two, and I'd like to discuss that as well.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Val Naylor. I'm the Executive Head Teacher of the Virtual School in the London Borough of Newham. So there's quite a lot of words there. For those of you who don't know what a virtual head does, we have, in each area, there is a virtual head who has a statutory role to promote the best possible educational, employment and training outcomes for all children with a social worker, in particular looked after children, but also any others. The London Borough of Newham, for those who don't know what it is or where it is, it's a perfectly formed, very lovely little borough in East London, famous for City Airport, West Ham, and being one of the most diverse and deprived areas in the country, but with one of the best education systems in the country. So we're very unusual. We welcome children into hotels on the initial contingency Section 95s. We welcome children who are dispersed into our borough under Section 98. We have a quota of 88 unaccompanied asylum seekers at any one time, and in our borough there are 167 languages. We are traditionally a borough to welcome new arrivals, and we're very proud of that.
Charitable Ambassador, as you can tell. I am also a trainee pilot. I actually do have my license, but not an airline pilot yet. I'm a research engineer working in Coventry. Most importantly, I was also a former refugee from Syria, came to the UK in 2015 with my family, with passion about education and the importance of demolishing stereotypes. Very excited for this.
Thank you. So, as you'll see, we've got an incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly esteemed panel, so hopefully we'll have some quite exciting opportunities to pick your collective brains to find out what is our call to action for all of us for taking things forward. So to begin with, I'd just like to ask you to sort of think about and share your views on what might be some of the considerations that those of us working in education, whether it's informal education, community and youth work, or traditional compulsory education, schools and colleges, what might be the things that we need to think about when we're shaping our offer, when we're talking about the unique needs of young people who might consider themselves to be newly arrived. So what are the things that we need to make sure that we're bedding in and including to really address the needs and support young people best? And whoever wants to comment on this, please feel free.
I don't mind, I'll come in. I'm a head teacher, I'm used to talking. I think there are lots of practical things we need to think about that if you don't get right can become problems. Things like uniform, things like working out how the young person or child is going to get to school, the transport system, understanding, in our case, understanding the mysteries of the DLR. There are things like lunch, how the lunch is going to be paid for. So all those practical things. In addition, the necessity for staff in schools to either be able to teach young people with English as a second language or for specialist staff to be in schools to support those young people. Knowledge for the school community of what the community can offer outside for the rest of the family as well. And then in terms of the well-being of the child, understanding of all those things that are outside the classroom that will impinge on their learning. And so I'm a teacher of 40 years standing, and most of that has been spent teaching young people who don't have English as a first language. There is always something that young person may be thinking about and may be triggered by when you're trying to teach them about something which seems quite straightforward. So being aware that there may be triggers, that there may be concerns outside, and I would say in my general role as a virtual head, teachers should always be aware of that, but it's particularly true of young people who've come as newly arrived children.
Some really interesting points there about how we consider both the practical things that might need to be in place, but also an understanding of sort of trauma-informed practices and sort of the therapeutic context. Thank you. Does anybody else want to come in on that point?
I just wanted to add, obviously all of these are extremely good points. When it comes to the English as additional language, I think that's extremely important because a lot of schools don't have the required resources to put that in place. And if they do, they're very stretched. They can't be everywhere because these children are coming in at different ages and with different levels of English, for instance. We also have children in general who have a problem with, well, not problem, but they have to deal with the issue of being outsiders coming in, and this idea of belonging, the idea of community, building within the schools and outside the schools as well. And I do think it also comes in with the trauma-informed approach as well, because some of the belonging and community issues can be affected by where they've come from, the kinds of violence that they've experienced, and the kinds of processes, shall we say, that they've had to go through before they even came to the UK, for instance. I also think that part of the process has to be ongoing rather than just when they've arrived they get this put in place, but it needs to keep going, and there should be several points when people check in with them, are you doing well, and what additional support needs to be put in place on top of this.
Yeah, that's really useful and really helpful, thank you. Beth, I wonder whether you'd like to comment on that point about like the additional support that schools could offer and community.
I think first of all there would be, I think that continuous assessment point is really important, and I know that's a natural in education, we're always continuously assessing, but I think obviously when English is a second language, sometimes that can mask SEN needs or other mental health conditions or concerns. So I think that's one of the things that you can see is that sometimes it can take a few years for those conversations to happen. So it's really important that, as you would with any child, you're more aware and you're sort of picking up on other cues and trying to understand the background of that child and their educational experiences. I think for us in FE, the post-16 provision, one of the things that we find is that our young people only are with us 3 days a week, so they have 2 days more in the community. So for us it's also thinking about what is that wraparound support for them when they're not in education. We actually find our attendance for our young people is really high. So across the rest of the college we're continuously churning and getting young people to attend. ESOL provision predominantly, and with us, our newly arrived young people, attendance is not an issue. They want to be in college because they really like that structure and something to do. But actually, what are they doing the other 2 days when they're not coming into college, and the weekends, and you've got these long summer periods ahead of them? That can be really isolating, and that's one of the things that I worry about the most for these young people. Is actually lots of them live independently. They live in shared housing, so they're living in groups of 4, 5, 6. Not much else, support network around them in the community. So that's one of the things that we spend a lot of time worrying about, and I think that's where those bridges between community groups and education are so vital, because for me, I'd love to work with, if there's anyone out here who works in South East London who wants to, I want to put on additional projects over the summer. We've got a building, come use it. There are things that we can do, and I think there's more sort of work to be done there between education and sort of local community groups.
There will definitely be a queue for you at break time to use your space. But I think that's it's really incredibly important to note that community connection. When we consider that young people only spend sort of 15% of their waking hours in school and 85% outside of school, connecting into communities and belonging and informal education and youth and community provision is key, right, in order to ensure that young people feel rooted and have a strong sense of identity and belonging. Maya, can I come to you, please? In terms of somebody who has experienced education, as somebody for whom English was a second language, and congratulations on that amazing degree. I could barely read the title of it, let alone study it, but what do you think were the things that were really successful? So what would you want other people to know that they should be doing to support young people?
Thank you. I actually wanted to come back to all these points that were just kind of mentioned, because it's very important to hear the kind of perspective from schools and people who provide these kind of services to young people, and also from someone who desperately needed them in a way, but never actually received them. So when we came to UK, my dad was already here, and we came on family reunification visas. So the route to the UK was all safe and sound. But then the issue began when I wanted to enroll in school. I was 16. I had just turned 16. It was April, and they had no idea what to do with me. Do you do your GCSEs? Do you do year, I don't know even what's before GCSEs, year 8 or 9? And I had no idea what to do either, because I could just about understand what they were saying to me, and they could just about understand what I was saying to them. And then there was just this gap of what do we do? My younger brothers were 11 and 4, so it was an easy, sound route for them. They had to go to school, they were forced to go to school, and so they acclimated in that perspective. But for me, I ended up being rejected from 3 schools, being told, to stay out of education for several months because I was in that kind of, what do we do with you kind of phase. Yes, I did not sound as good as I sound in English now, I'll give them that, but I did have the determination. They did see a student with their translated certificates from Syria saying, I want to sit in the classroom. And the answers that I would receive were, you would never make it to university. What you want to do is too hard for you. We cannot have you in our classrooms. So how do we bridge this gap? How do we tell? Because my parents had no idea what to do with me either. If we were in Syria, they'd be like, okay, yeah, we'll put you somewhere. But here, they have no idea what's the route. How do you get to education? What's A-levels, college, GCSEs? Those things were all so foreign for us, as well as the country. So this kind of support system was very important. I did end up going to college. I ended up going to an open day in a college, and I spoke to the teacher directly, and I said to him, I have no friends, I have no life, I just came here. I just want to study, can you please give me a space? And that's when he kindly agreed to test me for once, because all the previous schools rejected my request when I asked to be tested. So he agreed, I got into college, I did engineering, and then I moved forward to go to uni, and still till this day I have so many things that I have no idea how to do in terms of education. How do I help my brothers go with their A-levels or college, etc. So it's a very long process, but the importance of doing something outside school is also very important. For example, I went on and volunteered for a charity called the Children's Society in Birmingham. And I'd go there every week. That would increase my confidence. And the idea of belonging is really what helped me thrive with confidence, helped me feel that I belonged into a community. Because I genuinely did not feel like I belonged to anything coming here until I started volunteering, until I started going to college, until I felt like, I speak and people hear me. So there are lots of fronts we can work on from that perspective. But honestly, anyone's effort, and the fact that there are so many of you in this room shows that people are keen and passionate and want to help. And that by itself is a good starting point for initiatives and to creating this change that we want to see.
Thank you. There's so much to digest from what you said. I think one of the really interesting things for me in what you just talked about was having the doors closed on you in different environments. And I guess, so in my experience, I work with the Refugee Youth Service, and so a lot of unaccompanied young people, so young people sort of age 14 to 16 who come to the UK alone, who don't even have families who want to support them here in the UK and to help them try and navigate those systems. So there's definitely something for us to consider collectively about how do we make understanding the system a little bit more simple. Like, how can we enable that for young people and for their communities? And I think I'm also really interested in what's coming out in everybody's points of view, which is about belonging and community and engagement outside of school. If you were to give one piece of advice yourself to a youth worker or a teacher or somebody who's connecting with young people's education, for your little brothers maybe, what would be the one piece of advice that you would want them to know? What would be the one thing, if they forget everything else that they hear here today, what would be the one thing you want them to go home knowing and doing?
I don't serve well under pressure, but I'd say for once, ditch the labels and look at the person, the young person in front of you as a young person in front of you. It's as easy as that, whether they like the fun style of learning or whether they're dedicated and want to memorize things. Just look at them as young people that have the right to go to school, that have the right for good education and have a right of, a life, a normal one, and see what they like. It's as easy as that.
Thank you. Young person first, right? Val, can I come to you and just kind of ask you to kind of pick up on that point? So the concept of keeping a young person first against some of the challenges that you've mentioned in education, resources, etc. And what do you think that we need to be helping policymakers to think about in relation to that? What's the key messages?
I think one of the challenges for schools in particular is the size of the school and the number of classes and the number of teachers and what they can do and where the spaces are and all the practical things like that which determine who gets admitted to their school. I think the local authority though can really play a role here. The admissions team, whatever they call them in your borough, I don't know how many people are from local authorities, but ours are called pupil services for some reason, but they are our admissions team. They should pick up if a child is newly arrived when the application comes in. In Newham we have a policy which our directorate have made very clear that all children up to the end of year 10 will go straight into a school, and we will put them in school as soon as we possibly can. If they are looked after children, unaccompanied asylum seekers, they will get their first choice, and that is what happens. Now, if they are in year 11, if they come in the first term of year 11, they might go to school, depending on their previous knowledge of education in their own country and their ability. Because if you go into school after Christmas in year 11, the chance of you learning enough to even understand the exam papers for GCSE is pretty small. Now, we have had children who've arrived who are very clever and very educated in their own, from their own country, who do go into school at that point, but it's unusual. Majority of our year 11s, 12s and 13s, including our US young people and anybody from any other route, will be placed on what we call NewLAP, which is Newham Late Arrivals Programme, which is in partnership with our two colleges. We have a sixth form college and we have an FE college. Every child goes and gets tested as to what they might be able to do. If they go to NewVic, which is our sixth form, they will do a slightly more academic course with ESOL. And if they are less academic when they're tested, they will go to NCFE, which is our FE college, with ESOL mainly. And they will do what we consider to be a 3-year sixth form. So their year 11 will be the first year of their sixth form. They will stay at college and in their year 12 and 13 do more ESOL if they need to, but they may well go on to either be doing GCSEs, or they might have done some by then, or a vocational programme, or whatever they want to do at that stage. And that works really well. The constraint with that is obviously it has to be paid for. And so Newham, as a borough where we are always receiving people from other countries, has decided to put some money into that. But of course, all the boroughs are now have less money, all the schools have less money, all the colleges have less money. So at the moment we're continuing with that programme, and I hope we will continue with it. But I can understand if you were in an area where there were less children, that the practicalities of it might not work. We always have very large numbers, so it works for us. And I have to say, we've also had children at university, and it's very, very pleasing to see them moving forward. And also some who just go on and get a job and have nice lives.
I wonder if I can come to you on that point to give sort of a broader perspective on the role of training providers and colleges and youth and community providers in that kind of experience of young people. What do you think we need to think about that?
Yeah, and I was going to say that experience that we see that experience. We have young people come to us who are in that year 11 and say, I want to do ESOL, and we're saying, but as an FE provider, we can't enrol at that point because we're not funded at that point. However, one of the things that we have done in partnership with the local authority would be to occasionally we will have an arrangement, a service level agreement, where we do bring young people who are in year 10 or 11 and start delivering some of that ESOL. So that can happen at local authority level. I think that partnership you're saying, it's that working between the schools and FE and the local authority, that's really crucial. ESOL can be delivered in the community, and I think one of the things that's really apparent is that we need to, for lots of our young people, ESOL is the route to the next step. It's not the only qualification. Actually, it's the route to a vocation, to an academic subject, to university. And actually, the quicker we can move down that route, the better. And actually, we don't want people to be held up at that point. So it's really crucial that we look at what the actual planned destination is for the young person and help them get there as quick as possible. But ESOL, courses do tend to be the driving to move that forward. So I think it's just, it's those relationships with the local authority. I know for us as a provider, we work across 18 different local authorities. So that's one of the things that we find very difficult, is there will be a different process, a different way of working across every local authority we work with. So as an education provider, you're having to adapt each time you're working with a different partner. So I think the larger the provider, the more resources you might have, but also the different working in each community, which is difficult to navigate.
Yeah, that's really helpful, thank you. I guess what I'm hearing loudly from what you're saying is something about really clear partnerships and perhaps a greater shared process or understanding of ways of working so that we can enable young people to fulfil their potential rather than have barriers put in their way. And is there anything that you'd like to add on that perspective? How do we help young people to unlock their own potential against some of these barriers that young people face?
I think one of the things that is coming out of this, and what you've just underlined, is the idea that everybody and every single local authority is going to be doing it in a different way. And it's one of the things that we've been talking about as well nationally, that we kind of need to sort of streamline a little bit more about what's happening with refugee children and the kind of education that is given to them, because each local authority, each city, each part of this country is doing things differently. And I do think the provision, and I do think it's not just because we're all coming at it from more top, bottom to top rather than the other way around. And I do think that everybody needs to work together so that the provision is sort of, if not equal, at least measurably similar across the country. Because this is just in London you were talking about, and we're talking about an entire country that's doing things differently. With each city doing things differently, with each region of the university doing it differently. So coming together, I think, is the most important thing, and it's one of the things I think events like this enable us to do, which is people are here from different parts of the country, at least I'm hoping, that we sort of can come together and actually discuss what can be put in place, what can be implemented, and sort of get around the obstacles that are in the way, I think, is the most important thing.
Thank you. So definitely some really clear messages there about how we collaborate, how we communicate, and also how we make sure young people's voices are central to that process. I'm not very good at remembering names, so do apologise, but in the video there was a young woman who referred to like my big friends, and I think having that person that can advocate for you, having that person that can be your voice in the process and be alongside you is really, really key, and that's what really good youth and community workers are able to do. They're able to be that big friend, that supportive, trusted adult, that professional that can connect into that process. Okay, we've got a few minutes where we can open up to the floor and take some questions for our listening colleagues. So if you would like to ask a question, check in, raise a point or make a point, please raise your hand, and I'm sure one of us will get over to you with a microphone.
So my colleague Shamia behind's got a microphone. Shamia?
One of the elements I'm interested in when we are talking about what we can do to support children and young people to realize their potential is when their experiences are actually a part of a wider immigration asylum system, because there are some specific barriers that the system introduces beyond the barriers that we've mentioned already. So I'd be really interested to hear from you, how are you navigating these barriers and challenges that I imagine are coming up against time and time again, working with young children, with young people. We talked about loneliness. We know that many children who are refugees, children who are seeking asylum, are feeling lonely because they don't have their family with them. Obviously, the legal framework, it is what it is. There are some specific restrictions and barriers, but also it feels that because of these restrictions, it's just much harder for children to really realize their full potential because they are in the state of limbo, waiting for a decision, and it is taking years to get a decision on an asylum claim. They don't know whether they can have their mom, dad, brother or sister with them in the UK. But at the same time, we are talking about, the fantastic work you are doing, trying to make sure that they can achieve academically, go into having fulfilling lives. So I just wonder, and this is a huge topic, how do we square that circle with the system being what it is, and you all doing all this fantastic work, how we can support children and young people better? Thank you.
I can jump in. I think one of the things is for me, it's about key continuous relationships, and I think we talked about that trusted person. I think they're really important. I think as much stability as we can provide in a space which isn't very stable, and that waiting for that decision process. That's the majority of young people that we're working with, and that's always in the back of their minds. And actually, you can never forget that, and we shouldn't put that to one side as you're suggesting. I think we do need to recognise that, but also just provide as much stability as we can, so people can achieve. And one of the things that I know we talk about mental health later, so I won't go into detail, but for us it's also about that mental health and wellbeing package that surrounds that young person within education, and also ensuring that support can be accessed in their native language, because actually accessing therapy in a second language in ESOL, if you're not able to sort of fully understand, that's going to have as not much impact for you. So I won't go into mental health anymore, but mental health and education do go hand in hand, and it is a big part of our offer. One of the things that I do think is a big concern, particularly for the post-16, is one of the things we find quite a lot is a young person's home might change when they turn 18. So they are placed somewhere, and then they have their 18th birthday, and then they're moved. And that is incredibly unsettling, and we find that young people can move up to an hour away from their education. This young person now has to face a massive commute in, or transfer education provider mid-academic year. For me, that is something that I know in education I have very little control over, apart from pleading with local authorities continuously. I think that was something I would love for us to reflect on nationally, that's so detrimental. We've built that work, you've started to build those roots, we can feel that young person starting to settle, and then they move. So for me, that is one of the things that I don't have an answer for it, but I think it's something I'd really like us to reflect on as a group.
Yeah, I think that's really, really valuable, that notion of the cliff edge of being 18. I know without even seeing Cassie that for young people, and when we're talking about mental health services, that's a real challenge. I guess it's about how we focus on transition, and how we see young people as young people up until the age of 25, up until they've finished any potential educational journey, and how we begin to have that conversation more holistically. You're right, there's not a simple answer, but it's a very, very tricky one. Does anybody else want to respond?
Oh, if that's okay. Just to say that I recognise that from the other side of the fence, from the local authority. Children do get moved when they're 18, so I'm responsible for about 450 looked after children, of whom at the moment I think we've got about 70 unaccompanied children. They will be moved when they're 18. The decisions that are made and the places that are placed, people do have a chance to try to influence those, and I bang my head against a wall quite regularly where I say don't move them, don't move them, don't move them too far from school or college, and sometimes I'm successful, but it is something that all professionals and partners who are involved in that child's education and life need to be banging on about and annoying everybody. That's partly my role. That's the other word for a virtual head. It's that annoying person. And so, looked after children, we don't always get it right, but they're lucky they've got somebody like me in each borough who's generally being annoying and saying don't move that child. The other thing I wanted to mention, actually, which sort of reflected on the questions at the back there about the legal status, and it kind of, and I don't want to lose the point, was about moving of children from contingency placements as well. And yeah, so if I do the papers first, many of our children don't have papers. One of the things which I think we all need to do better in the sphere of those who support these young people is to support them to get their papers as quickly as possible. A few years ago, I came across a horrific case, and I actually don't want this one to be in the papers, where a child had been in care for some time and her papers were not secured in time for her to go to university at the time she got a place. We had to then spend another year getting the papers so that she could go to university. She went and she's successfully completed and all the rest of it, but it was an oversight some years previous by somebody. Getting someone there appropriately to remain or whatever they're going to get as soon as possible, and a decision is really important to those young people, and it gets in the way of everything. It plays on their minds as well. So that's something to talk about maybe on the tables. Getting back to your point about the moving of the young people, just to mention those of you who have boroughs where you have hotels, we rejoice in many hotels in Newham because we're near City Airport, and they are full of people who've been placed there as emergency accommodation. So emergency accommodation, they are supposed to be there for only a short time. Our findings are that they are often there for 18 months. During that time, we will have sent in our navigators who support them to go and get enrolled for school and GPs and benefits and anything else that they're entitled to. And then all of a sudden, one day, they get moved under the dispersal arrangements. And that can be anywhere, it doesn't have to be anywhere near to where they are. So they've got settled, they're liking their life in Newham, having a nice time with their friends in school or college, and then all of a sudden they're moved. And that seems to me to be a terrible thing to do. And there are many examples of where that's disrupted children's education apart from their lives. So kids being moved in the middle of Key Stage 4, just before taking their GCSEs, they're suddenly moved to another county. So very concerning. So that whole, the interaction with the Home Office, I suppose, is what I'm talking about. So it's in terms of the papers, but also in terms of the different sections under which children are placed. There are some concerns there, I think, that might be worth talking about. I don't know who else is in the room. Have we got anybody from the Home Office? Councils maybe can talk about it.
Make sure it gets sped up. Definitely make sure it gets sped up. There's some pretty strong messages from both panellists there in relation to collaborating, communicating and advocacy, and doing that as early as we possibly can, to have as much influence as we possibly can to bring stability. I think that feels like it's a really strong message from everybody. Okay, we've got time for another question. I think there's a couple of hands up in the room.
Shamia, you going to pass the mic then? Who's got a hand up?
Shout out from behind her. There's a lady in the middle there, and then there's a person over here too. Thank you.
My name is Sally from Liverpool. I'm raising the point with regard to movement and staying put. Just want to say that, okay, with my experience, I find what works very well is that during your LAC reviews, obviously it's not just for social care, because it's all professional education health, but that is planned in advance, and I've had the experience of having it successfully done simply because you didn't do it just before they're 18. You have to start doing it. So for example, if you come in when you're 16, you have to start planning and making sure that after children LAC review, that it is explicitly made. You mentioned about the school doesn't like this sort of movement, but you express it quite strongly that if this child is going to be moved, can we please discuss with the foster carers, even if the placement that this is what you want. I have successfully done it simply because there was an ongoing discussion on time. One of the biggest problems is when you have those discussions 6 months before that child turns 18. It is, in my view, an experience actually quite late. So that's what I would say with regard to that. I just wanted to ask another question, and that's with regard, I suppose, to you, Val. Just looking at your title there. One of the things I want to ask is, in terms of your engagement with local authorities when they're having children who are being dispersed or coming into the local authority in terms of the NTS,
Yes.
what is your relationship? I'm only focusing on you simply because I don't work in London. My last place was in London, but you are London. So what sort of relationship do you have with the local authority in terms of, do you meet weekly with them? Because my last experience was I was meeting weekly with the NTS, dispersal officer. So he allowed us to form a relationship, and she was able to listen to things like, please don't remove children from hotel quickly without us knowing. So I suppose it's all based on individual relationship that you have, because they have a lot to do, so they might not. But I found that when you have those regular meetings, it actually helped a lot in terms of not dispersing them without school knowing, especially when they just turned 18 and they've been there for 18 months and all of a sudden you're weeks. So I just want to know what your borough does with regard to that specific.
I'm afraid I can give you a very rosy picture of how marvellous Newham is. It is in many, many ways. But you found the one bit that's not. So we have tried very hard. It's not actually my service that does this, it's another part of the council. But we have tried really hard to engage with the Home Office and the Commission services that are used to support children who are dispersed, or families that are dispersed. They will not share any information with us about who those families are, and so we don't know whether there are children, if those children are in school and college, or anything else. Now, sometimes it comes to light. We do share information with the Home Office for the children who are placed in hotels, and so we can check that those children all have an offer. We can make sure that we have these people called navigators that go into the hotels and support the families to get to where they need to get to do whatever it is they want to do, register with GP, fill in a form for school. But the ones who are placed on the dispersal we don't know about. And because Newham is a relatively poor area, the rents are much lower in Newham than they are in other parts of London, and so we do get quite a lot of people placed on dispersal orders. So it is an area of concern for us. We try to get around it. We have got quite a lot of policies and meetings, you can imagine. And we have a social welfare alliance, which is an alliance of people within the council, but also in the third sector, so community groups, charities, etc., who come together to try to support as many of the families that we find out about in those situations. And of course, if they apply for school, then we would process them and they would get to school in the same way. It's just that we don't know whether there are any out there that haven't come forward to apply for schools or college. So I'm sorry, we don't have the answer on that one.
But I think that maybe is the answer, because if it's like that in your borough, then there's a really strong likelihood that you could replicate that all over the country. And so I guess that's perhaps a key thinking point for us to take away from today. Yeah, thank you. Okay, final questions? Oh, okay, sorry, I won't be there.
What about when you meet with you?
Yeah.
Just watching the time.
Matthew Woods from Reach Wales. I'll be speaking later on the mental health panel. I just wanted to open up with a question which I'm currently grappling with. I would like someone to speak about the intersectionality between forced migrants being, young people, and additional learning needs, and recognising those additional learning needs, and how you're kind of coming together to recognise that specific issue within that cohort, and what you're doing to address that.
I'm really sorry. You said intersectionality, and I got...
Sorry,
again.
additional learning needs
And
being forced migrants.
Okay. So in terms of additional need, any good school should assess any child who comes to them, and the same for colleges. and the same for training providers. That is part of what we would do, all of us in education, as our daily work. I'm not saying we always get it right, but we would do that. When a child first arrives in an educational establishment, they will normally do some kind of assessment. That might not look like an assessment, might be tell me about yourself, it might be draw me a picture, depending on their age and ability. And then obviously more formal assessments will carry on later. What I would say is that in my long experience, many children's needs don't come to the fore until later. And that's the case anyway. My colleague at the back who obviously works with looked after children knows all this. Many of our children who have suffered trauma, that trauma comes out later in life, often in years 9, 10 and 11 when they hit puberty, but may not always be then. The same for children who've had traumas getting to this country or traumas in their home country. So where the needs are traditional, SEND, learning needs, they should be picked up in schools and so on. But where they are something which is related to experience, it may well be that they are picked up later. And that's the pattern for many children, not just for children who've come as migrants, unfortunately.
Thank you. We've been called to time. I'm aware that in the room there's a lot of people who are really interested in education and informal education as a topic. All of the panellists, as far as I know, are going to be here for the rest of the day. So please try not to all land at once to ask them questions, but they are here and take the opportunity to talk with them, and we can pick up on any specific issues on tables and throughout the rest of today. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to our panel. Can everyone applause?